Welcome to this talk. It's Thursday the 16th of March. Now, it's starting to look like there's been an international conspiracy among some of the world's most senior scientists. Now, that sounds utterly absurd, but that's the way it's starting to look. Now, I'm going to play you a couple of clips today from the House Select Committee on the Coronavirus Pandemic, which is holding a hearing on the origins of SARS coronavirus 2. So I'm going to play you the first clip now, and then we'll talk about it. And really, it looks like you couldn't make this stuff up. It's absolutely incredible. So let's go straight over to the hearing now.
I now recognize Ms. Maliotakis from New York for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you. Chairman, for 2 years, myself and the other Republicans on this subcommittee connected the dots. We exposed the evidence supporting our strong belief that COVID was developed and leaked from the Wuhan lab. And during those same 2 years, the same Democrats that sit on this committee, they only hindered, they obstructed, they refused to hold hearings and get to the truth. Now we see mounting evidence supporting the COVID-19 originated from the lab in Wuhan, China, run by the Communist Chinese Party. And this hearing is about getting to the truth. I thank the chairman for making this the very first hearing, because the American people who have seen just as many fellow Americans die from COVID, as nearly as many die from COVID, that died in every war since the American Revolution combined, deserve to know the truth. Dr. Redfield, you pointed to the lab leak theory even before we did. In mid-January of 2020, you expressed concerns to Dr. Fauci, to Jeremy Farrar of UK's Wellcome Trust, and to Dr. Tedros of World Health Organization that, quote, we had to take the lab leak hypothesis with extreme seriousness. And you urged Dr. Fauci to investigate both the lab and the natural hypotheses. Shortly thereafter, on February 1st, Farrar convened a meeting of a group of 11 top scientists across 5 time zones and asked Dr. Fauci to join, and he wrote, quote, my preference is to keep this group really tight. Obviously, ask everyone to treat in total confidence, unquote. Dr. Redfield, you were excluded from this call, but up until then, you had been on you were included in every other conversation. What changed? Why do you think that you were excluded from these conversations?
Thank you very much. I think just to emphasize, in early to mid-January, I did have multiple calls with Fauci, Farrar, and Tedros about how important I thought it was that science get engaged in aggressively pursuing both hypotheses. I also expressed, as a clinical virologist, that I felt it was not scientifically plausible that this virus went from a bat to humans and became one of the most infectious viruses that we have for humans. All viruses are not the same. So when you look at coronaviruses, for SARS and MERS, for example, when they entered the human species, which they did via an intermediate, they never learned how to go human to human. Even to this day, they don't know how to go human to human. So you can't equate Ebola with a coronavirus.
Now, why do you think you were excluded from those calls?
Because it was told to me that they wanted a single narrative and that I obviously had a different point of view.
Okay. In emails following the conference call, 4 of the 11 scientists told Fauci that they all found the genetic sequence inconsistent with expectations from evolutionary theory, basically what you're saying. However, just 3 days later, these 4 scientists had drafted a paper arguing the exact opposite, and that's now the infamous proximal origin of SARS-CoV-2. Our investigations show that this paper was prompted by Dr. Fauci, among others, with a goal to disprove the lab leak theory. What is the likelihood that these scientists came across additional information just 3 days after making these statements to conclude with such certainty that COVID-19 came from nature instead of the lab leak that they thought it was 3 days earlier?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. Again, I've said this before, that this whole approach that was taken on February 1st and subsequently in the month of February, if you really want to be truthful, it's antithetical to science.
Thank you.
Science has debate, and they squashed any debate.
Thank you. Given what we know now and looking at all the conversations in February of 2020 and before the release of the paper, do you think that Dr. Fauci used this paper to hide the gain-of-function research created this virus?
I can't talk about Fauci's motivation.
Do you think that the paper does hide the truth?
I think it's an inaccurate paper that basically was part of a narrative that they were creating. Remember, this pandemic did not start in January at the seafood market. We now know there was infections all the way back into September. This was a narrative that was decided that they were going to say this came from the wet market, and they were going to do everything they could to support it, to negate any discussion about the possibility that this came from a laboratory.
I got 20 seconds left. Dr. Fauci was affirmatively told in an email that NIAID had a monetary relationship with the Wuhan Institute through EcoHealth Alliance. He was told this in January 27th of 2020. Do you think that Dr. Fauci intentionally lied under oath to Senator Paul when he vehemently denied NIH's funding of gain-of-function research?
I think there's no doubt that NIH was funding gain-of-function research.
Is it likely that American tax dollars funded the gain-of-function research that created this virus?
I think it did, not only from NIH, but from the State Department, USAID, and from DOD.
I'm out of time. Thank you very much.
Wow, that is just pretty incredible, isn't it? So just the characters here. So this is Nicole Malakatos, New York senator. And that, of course, was Dr. Robert Redfield, the director for the Centers for Disease Control. He urged Dr. Fauci to investigate, and Sir Jeremy Farrar, the director of the Wellcome Trust, former professor of tropical medicine at Oxford University, seems to have been in this link. And Dr. Tedros, of course, which was no great surprise from the so-called World Health Organization. They wanted a really tight group with total confidence. It's just unbelievable. This is the antithesis of science, and Dr. Redfield there, as a clinical virologist, said that the evolutionary jump really just doesn't make any sense. And of course, we've never found the intermediate species. You know, can there be any question now that this is a lab leak? 11 scientists all agreed that it couldn't come from a natural origin, and then a few days later they wrote this paper here, or they worked out on this paper here somehow, proximal origin of SARS coronavirus 2. And one sentence here is, our analysis clearly shows that SARS coronavirus 2 is not a laboratory construct or purposefully manipulated virus. Now, this is published in Nature magazine. At this time, we believed that scientific journals were as good as we got, the closest thing we got to truth. Now it looks like it's all been a complete sham. And so these people here, these authors, surely they now have questions to answer. Department of Immunology and Microbiology, California. This one is from the University of Edinburgh in the UK. This one is from School of Public Health of Columbia University, New York. School of Life and Environmental Sciences, School of Medical Science, University of Sydney, Australia. I mean, this appears to be an international conspiracy. It is quite unbelievable. Because apparently this group of 11 scientists who were on this call, we were not told who they were, but they got together, agreed it was evolutionarily impossible for this virus to jump. And then we got this paper here, and this paper was first published on the 17th of March 2020. Quite incredible. And then, of course, talk about Dr. Fauci there. Now, Dr. Fauci assured us that he was the science. Is that what he said? I am the science. So in other words, if you disagree with me, you're disagreeing with science. Now, some might think that's a little bit arrogant for someone who's got about 40 years of administrative experience. Plenty of articles on this. This is one of the more amusing ones I found here, where Elon Musk was commenting on this I am science statement that refuted all criticism of COVID policy. Just how can a scientist say, I am the science? It's just, the arrogance is just beyond description. Science works by this dialectic progression of arguments. So Dr. Redfield there, former director of Centers for Disease Control, National Institutes of Health money went to the Eco Health Alliance, that went to Wuhan. No doubt, National Institutes of Health funded gain-of-function research in the Wuhan laboratory. You really couldn't make it up. Now, I'm going to play you one more clip because this adds quite a lot of context that's pretty useful from the same hearings. Let's listen to this one.
I now recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Comer from Kentucky, for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the prevailing themes of the pandemic has been scientists' use of the media to downplay the lab leak theory. Mr. Wade, in your career, you worked at Nature magazine, Science magazine, and the New York Times. Would you agree that the scientific establishment used the media to downplay the lab leak theory?
Microphone.
That's a complicated issue, Mr. Comer. I think the media was used. It was used in this particular campaign to establish the natural origin theory. The scientific community is very afraid to speak up on political issues, and I think the reason is that the government grants are handed out through this system of peer review committees, right. And so you don't want any single scientist on your peer review committee to vote against you. Therefore, because you won't get your grant, it's so competitive. So therefore, scientists are very reluctant to say anything that is politically divisive or might turn other scientists off against them. This means that they cannot be relied upon in the way that I think we would like them to be independent and forthright and call it as they see it.
Okay. Well, we saw this first with the proximal origin paper that said, quote, our analysis clearly showed that COVID-19 is not a laboratory construct or a purposely manipulated virus, end quote. This was first published on February 17th of 2020. Each witness, I have a simple question, yes or no. Was there science available to make such an unequivocal statement against the possibility of a lab leak that early on in February of 2020? Dr.
Absolutely no.
Mr. Wade.
No, it was not.
Yeah, I don't have sufficient frame of reference to give an answer.
No.
Next, Peter Daszak of EcoHealth Alliance orchestrated a letter in The Lancet, a prestigious journal, on February 19, 2020 that said, quote, we strongly condemn conspiracy theories suggesting that COVID-19 does not have a natural origin, end quote. Each witness, yes or no, is the possibility COVID-19 leaked from a lab a conspiracy theory? Dr.
Absolutely not.
No.
I would say no, but also it has been approached as such.
Dr.
No.
Redfield. Dr. Redfield, I want to stick with you. You have said before that you were locked out of conversations about the lab leak by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins. Do you think they kept you out of the conversations because you believe COVID-19 may have come from a lab?
Yeah, I think I made it very clear in January to all of them why we had to aggressively pursue this, and I let them know as a virologist that I didn't see that this was anything like SARS or MERS because they never learned how to transmit human to human, that I felt this virus was too infectious for humans. There was a lot of evidence that lab actually published in 2014 that they put the H2 receptor into humanized mice so it could infect human tissue. I think, we had to really seriously go after the fact that it came from the lab, and they knew that that was how I was thinking, although I thought we had to go after both hypotheses. And I was told later, I didn't know I was excluded. I didn't know there was a February 1st conference call until the Freedom of Information came out with the emails, and I was quite upset as the CDC director that I was excluded from those discussions.
Why would they do this?
Because I had a different point of view, and I was told they made a decision that they would keep this confidential until they came up with a single narrative, which I will argue is antithetical to science. Science never selects a single narrative. We foster, as my colleague here just said, we foster debate. And we're confident that with debate, science will eventually get to the truth. This was an a priori decision that there's one point of view that we're going to put out there, and anyone who doesn't agree with it is going to be sidelined. And as I say, I was only the CDC director, and I was sidelined.
Well, I think Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins got caught with their hand in the cookie jar. They got caught supercharging viruses in an unsecure Chinese lab. They wanted to push the envelope, and so they got together to cover themselves, cover up their story, and wipe their fingerprints of the virus that has killed more than 1 million Americans. To quote Jurassic Park, they were, quote, so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should, end quote.
Good grief. Right, okay. Supercharged the virus. So that's James Comer, congressman from Kentucky, the chair of the committee. So Mr. Wade there involved in a lot of publishing, saying that the government grants are basically awarded to people who don't rock the boat. Therefore, there wasn't a lot of boat rockers. You know, we needed a man and a woman to stand in the gap, and did we get one? Well, not many, and those that we did were silenced by the media. And of course, most of us were swilling around in complete ignorance. We were treated like utter mushrooms during this time. Naively, it now turns out, trusting international scientists, taking them at their word, believing that the peer review process for journals worked and would filter out inaccurate material, when in actual fact this was published in peer-reviewed journals. The Nature Journal, the Lancet Journal, I mean, these are, we thought, these were the bedrock. The damage this has done to confidence in science is indescribable. The scientific process is still probably the best way we've got of getting to truth. It's the way that it's handled by human beings that's the problem. It's not knocking science, but the way science has been done has been completely discredited, in my view. I love the way Dr. Redfield was so definitive in answering his questions. No. What he talked about there was ACE2 receptor. This is probably how the gain of function was done. ACE2 receptor was put into humanized mice. Now, this is genetic jiggery-pokery. And basically what they do is they'll take a human gene, in this case the gene to make the ACE2 receptor, which of course is where the SARS coronavirus 2 spike protein fits in. They put that gene into a mouse. So you get a mouse that's part human and part mouse. It still looks like a mouse, but it's got a human gene in, or several human genes, to make this ACE2 receptor. Now, some of you might find the idea of these transgenic human mice organisms distasteful to begin with, but that appears to be what they did. Then they could continuously reinfect the mice with the SARS coronavirus 2, multiple generations of infection, take out the variants which were more transmissible between mice. And because this was done in mice, but it was actually a human ACE2 receptor, then by definition, it was going to be more transmissible in mice. So Middle East respiratory syndrome that Dr. Redfield talked about, SARS coronavirus 1, which Dr. Redfield talked about, weren't that transmissible. The reason we had the pandemic is firstly that the SARS coronavirus 2 was highly transmissible, and secondly that it was transmissible before the patients were fully symptomatic, or even before they were symptomatic at all. And that doesn't happen with natural evolution, or if it did, the intermediate animal species hosts would be there, and the pandemic would have emerged at different places at different times. That didn't happen. And I'm just really pleased that the truth is coming to light now. The disillusionment, the betrayal, let down by governments. I mean, we believe our senior scientific officer at the time might have been involved in trying to dampen down, shall we say, the lab leak hypothesis. Some of the most senior scientists in the world, I feel, betrayed because the information we're given at the time didn't allow us to see this. It's now coming out, and it's just a complete international disgrace. So it now looks like American money funded the research that went to Wuhan that caused the accidental release of the virus, and that caused the pandemic. This is now a very real possibility, and let's hope that this committee can come to some definitive conclusions. And I think that there's a reasonably good chance that it will. Hopefully we'll be hearing from Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins, who, according to Mr. James Comer, got their hand caught in the cookie jar. Let's hope that we hear from them soon. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. I'll leave it there while I'm still in professional mode, and thank you for watching.